Thank you all for being here. For those that don't know me, I'm Max Lehman. I own Loan People, and I run Lehman Team. Today, as you all know, we're here to talk about the changes to contracts starting August 13th. As you know, the cooperative compensation will be removed from the MLS, and some firms will no longer offer it. This is how buyer agents have been paid for decades, and it's changing, which can be scary. It means that processes are going to change. So we're going to talk about some of this stuff today. Our panelist, Sarah Rayleigh, brings over 2 decades of experience to her role as Chief Operating Officer and Broker of Record at Moreland Properties. Since joining the company in 2002, Sarah has played a pivotal role in its growth and success, working closely with founder Emily Moreland to oversee all facets of the brokerage with a keen focus on excellence and a deep commitment to client satisfaction. Sarah has become an integral part of Moreland's reputation for exceptional service. Drew Beauford brings over a decade of industry experience into the Austin market. He began his career in 2013, initially working part-time. By 2015, Drew transitioned to a full-time agent, and within his first year, he achieved the remarkable distinction of ranking in the top 1% of agents nationwide, through demonstrating his exceptional sales knowledge and client dedication. His leadership skills became evident quickly as he built and managed a high-performing team of up to 20 agents. His strategic vision and commitment to excellence led him to become the owner and operator of Pure Realty, the largest brokerage in Cedar Park, overseeing more than 150 agents. And then we have Eric Bramlett. He is the broker owner of Bramlett Residential, a mid-sized firm in Central Texas. Eric has worked in Austin real estate for 21 years, and he was a high-producing agent and team leader prior to moving into management at Bramlett. Eric and Bramlett Residential strive to raise the bar in real estate through strong systems and processes, high standards, and collaboration with colleagues both in and out of the firm. So, thank you guys for all being here and doing this.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.
So we're here to discuss process changes, and we won't get into the weeds on contracts. Contract questions are important. If you have contract questions, please write them down so that you can research them later. We want to make sure we have a lot of fun and we have a lot of time to talk about processes. Sarah, Drew, and Eric are here to discuss process changes that their firms are implementing. Combined, they lead more than 400 top producing agents in Austin. So, Eric, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, we're here to talk about processes, and I won't try to read it, but I wanted to share an email with one of our really seasoned agents that I was emailing with him this morning. Steve has about 30 years of experience in Austin real estate, and we were just kind of going back and forth on the contract changes. And he said, wow, almost dizzying, simple to think about in concept, but the forms are all over the place. And I couldn't agree more with him. And honestly, we had presented the TXR form to our agents a couple of weeks ago, and then meeting with Drew and Sarah yesterday, I realized that I'd missed a piece there. But I try to distill things down. I'm a big fan of remembering very simple rules, keep it simple. And when you do that, you generally are going to come out okay. So there are 2 things everyone in this room needs to remember. And if you remember these 2 things, you will be okay. The first is you always use a buyer's rep agreement early in the process. Full stop. Before you start showing houses, get a buyer's rep agreement. If you're working with someone in a client capacity, get a buyer's rep agreement. That's it. The second thing you need to remember is that your commission is no longer protected by the MLS. The cooperative compensation is gone in the MLS. So you need to include commission information on every contract. That's it. If you don't have commission information on the contract, you might not get paid. Buyer's rep agreement, commission addenda. That's what I remember, and that's what we're trying to teach our agents. Now, how you do that is going to be a little bit different. Everyone is going to have different processes that they personally use, and the reason that we're here is to share our processes and to make everybody feel comfortable that even though we're 3 different firms with slightly different processes, they all work together just fine. That's what I got.
It was interesting. We met yesterday, and so listening to the 3 of them talk about their processes, and okay, you do it this way, but we do it this way. So what if we submit an offer to you? How does this work? And watching them collaborate and how it all integrates well was really interesting. We'll go talk about listing agreements in a second, but I want to say one thing. I know every time you start talking about people's commission compensation, it's scary. Everybody thinks, oh, I'm gonna make less money. People are gonna want to pay me less money. This kind of thing. As lenders, we went through this in 2010. Our comp got changed and regulated. And a lot of cases, loan officers started making more money at that time. Financial advisors just went through this. I think it was 2019, something like that. Like, industries change, regulations change, compensation rules change, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. Not all change is bad. It just is change, and it takes some getting used to. We get 6 months down the road from this thing, and everybody's going to probably, in my opinion, have this wasn't such a big deal. And some of you might be making more money as a result of this. So just keep that in mind. So we're going to talk about listing agreement changes. Sarah, we've got you going first. What do we got with that?
Yes, hi. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Eric, for pulling me into this and us having some local companies to collaborate with. Our firm at Moreland has a large book of listings. We do love inventory. So a lot of these changes really made us take a hard look at the listing side of how this affects clientele. And I think in looking at this, the idea that we were in such a huge, fast market before, and now our market is slowing and inventory is taking a little bit longer and sitting, it gives us an opportunity to really get back to the basics of how we help our clients. And I know with a listing, the biggest thing is to make sure that that client has the highest and best price for their home. And none of that has changed. I know when our clients sit down with the agents and they talk, representation is hugely valued, and they also want to explain marketing of a home, all those same questions that perhaps got quickly asked before are now more important than ever. Why you're moving, what drew you to the home in the first place. Get them to talk, get them to dream, get to know them, understand that setting that appointment and establishing that trust, driving up to the house, all that is the same. Do not park in the driveway and walk across their lawn. You know, all those little tips and tricks that I know our top agents have had honed for years. Now is the time to really look at those and dust those off and go, okay, what are my best practices? What is my value? Who am I to my client? And then as you go through those steps, you're meeting with the client, you talk about the home, you talk about your marketing, you get to the end, and you definitely talk about representation. And with the listing agreements updated as of June 24th, those talks, when you get to compensation, have altered a bit. And so those sellers have options. They always have, and this has always been negotiable, but the idea that it's being uncoupled and that some sellers are wanting to uncouple it, there still can be cooperation, but that is up to you and your seller. It's up to the market they're in. It's up to their neighborhood. You are the market expert in this. You're the advisor. And so as you go through those, as you get to that paragraph with compensation, you can say, there are three options that you have. This is me. This is my fee. My fee is X. I'll say that today. My fee is X. And then on the buyer side, you're going to see that you can offer that buyer side compensation, or would you like to offer it as a, what's the word? Concession, thank you, or is none. And what do you think is going to be the highest and best way to get to the end of the closing table in this market, and what you would like to do? Y'all can decide that, fill the paperwork out as such, and call it a day. So I know as you look at the listing, this is something that feels different because it is, but in reality, you've been negotiating and talking about this all along. It's just broken out differently in the listing, as well as how you communicate that. Do they want to offer that incentive online? Do they want to tout it? It's just a matter of kind of navigating that together with your client. I think these are critical conversations that happen when you're with a potential client and with a listing. And if you're competing, you can ask, who I'm competing with and all the things you want to do and be that last agent in. I think it's a really good time to hone those skills and get ready for hopefully a good spring ahead, but then to get to know all these different forms. I will touch on a form. I know if you have an older listing agreement, some of our listings have been on the market a bit, they're not on that new form that has been released. So there is one amendment that you do have to get, 2701, that says you've had this conversation, that you know that compensation is being removed from MLS, and that it'll be marketed accordingly after that. Just acknowledge that. And so I think that's been a form that's been a fairly easy conversation. I think you can work yourself up on what might happen in a conversation all day long. But in reality, the idea that our listing agents have been out having these conversations, they've all gone beautifully. And so I think it's a matter of kind of having those, and every time you have one, it gets a little easier, and getting your mode that what you want to say a little bit easier is a benefit. So there you go.
That's great. That's awesome. Drew, what do you got?
To couple off what Sarah said, I think the most important part is a strong listing presentation, of course, right? So you're going in there, you're displaying your value, but the compensation conversation should be very simple, right? Nothing's really changed in retrospect. I charge X percent, right? What do you want to offer to the buy side? It can be 1%, 2%, 3%, 0%, 50%, whatever you feel comfortable with. And so that's the conversations that we're guiding our sellers through and letting them decide what that looks like for them. If they say 0, okay, that's fine. Just set the proper expectation that just because we're saying 0 now doesn't mean you're not going to have to pay the buying side at some point, right? So you want to make sure that you're always setting proper expectations of, hey, we're agreeing to 0, but just know that the buying side more than likely will be asking for some sort of compensation. We don't know what that's going to be, but we can anticipate it's going to be somewhere around the 3%. So just earmark that. And then when offers come, of course, it's, getting them to understand what their true net is so they can figure out if it's the right financial decision for them. I think as realtors, we really get caught up in thinking that our sellers always want the most for their house. And that's not always the truth, right? Like, yeah, they want a good, fair price and they want to feel good about it, but not all sellers want the most, depending on their situation. If they have to sell, right, they're going to be willing to take maybe, what wasn't ideal for them in their mind because it's a need. If they just like to sell, they're less likely to kind of budge on that net amount. And so I think it's really understanding the situation that our clients are in and guiding them through that process. Another way to think about it is, if your sellers don't want to offer any cooperating compensation, you have another chance to kind of reapproach the situation in paragraph 11, section F, where it asks for permission to be able to advertise concessions. And so we're saying, hey, I get that you didn't want to offer any compensation, and that's totally cool. But in this paragraph, we could decide if you wanted to advertise the willingness to provide concessions. And that's a really great way to help your listing stand out above some of the others. So would you be willing to consider that? And then that opens up a whole nother conversation. And so you've turned somebody into saying, no, I don't want to offer cooperating compensation, to another approach at it as, okay, yeah, maybe concessions makes a little bit more sense in their mind. And it's just another way to hopefully get them to realize and get on board, because I truly believe that more than likely it's going to end up costing them somewhere in that 3%, no matter how you split it. So it's just all about those clear, concise conversations with your sellers.
I couldn't agree more. We're contracting things a little bit differently than you guys are, and I want to just illustrate that it still works completely fine. I ask our agents a ton of questions, and I think they probably maybe get annoyed by it a little bit. Tara was in Colorado marrying her son off. Congrats. And I emailed her a really long email saying, hey, I'm thinking about requiring that we no longer offer cooperative compensation, right? It was something that I still think is probably going away. I think that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, you won't see cooperative compensation in listing agreements. I could be wrong. Making predictions is always a little dangerous thing to do. Casey actually emailed back and said, hey, you're really small. You don't need to try to lead the national industry here. And I said, no, it's good feedback. We should probably just keep doing things the same way we've been doing them. Then we saw the news from EXP. I think that was a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And I was happy. I said, this simplifies things. We don't need cooperative compensation in the listing agreement in order for us to get paid. If you're a heavy lister, raise your hand if you prefer to have a buyer's agent on the other end of the transaction, or if you prefer, buyer's agent on the other transaction, right? Why is that? It's because the likelihood, there's a lot of things, it's a lot more pleasant than dealing with, an unrepresented buyer. But in your seller's best interest, the likelihood of success goes up. I don't know. It probably doubles, if you have a buyer's agent, a good buyer's agent, right? A bad one can sink deals, but that's fortunately the edge case. So in preparation for what I think will happen, we're not requiring that our agents write listing agreements without cooperative comp, but we're recommending it. And we're saying, hey, if you guys use the ABOR unlock form, it's really easy. Cooperative compensation is already pulled out of it. And what I like better about the form is that whenever you get to, I think it's paragraph 11 there as well, you can actually write in the amount of concessions that you want to advertise. It's really 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. You know, it's really important to explain to your sellers that most buyers, I think NAR says 89% of buyers use a buyer agent. Now, if you're a heavy buyer side agent, raise your hand if you like to work for free, right? So if you prefer to open up to the entire market and market your property to 100% of buyers out there, you probably want to offer some concessions. That's probably the case. We have data that shows what the average commission was in the past 12 months, 18 months, whatnot. And you can share that data with them. And you can say, look, there's a market standard commission that you can expect. And going back to what Tara emailed me whenever she got around to it, was she said, Eric, I don't get it. Like, this just looks like expectations. Aren't we just setting the expectation that they're probably going to pay a buyer agent commission that's going to be a market standard? And I said, absolutely. The contract is just a little bit different. So it's really scary whenever you see, articles that say buyers agents are not going to get paid anymore. The way we're getting paid is changing, and it's never going to be the same. And Sarah said yesterday, I don't think this is a tectonic shift. I don't think it's even measures on the Richter scale, to be honest. I think that rather than have a listing broker taking the money, which never even really takes the money, and then theoretically funnels over to the buyer broker, you're just removing that cooperative compensation. The fact is that people have a better experience buying a home when they work with a good buyer agent. The fact is good buyer agents won't work for free. And there might be some downward compression on the commission, maybe, but we're yet to see that. The gist is that on August 13th, buyer agents are still going to get paid as long as you write your contracts in the right way.
When we were talking yesterday, and y'all use this word a couple of times now, expectations, right? It's all about setting expectations. And at the end of the day, Drew said this a couple of times, but the sellers have a price. What is their net? And that's mostly what they care about, is that net price. So how you get there is the same. And Sarah mentioned as well, you look at comps starting on August 13th for the last 12 months, that included buyer agent commission. It's already been priced in. So, I think this is awesome information. And yeah, I mean, it's just about setting expectations. We were going to kind of go group by group. So does anybody have any questions right now?
If you could sit tight until Max walks over there so that people online can also see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Wendy Ogle, Central Metro. We had a little meeting with somebody from ABOR, and they said that you're not allowed to use or put on contracts percentages. So that creates a little bit of a technical, how do we make that work?
If you are an agent for longer than 6 months, can you 3% in your head on pretty much any price? There we go.
Also, all the contracts I've seen have a percentage spot and a dollar amount spot.
The ABOR doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see you can hit
docs.
Space and write in percent if you want to.
Who else? I saw a couple hands.
Won't do that.
I agree that this is not a big deal. This is, I think, an opportunity to discuss this more for more transparency. I'm thrilled about buyers agents calling on my listings more to find out what the sellers are offering. I don't think I can get too much of that right now. My question is, and my concern is in regard to future appraisals and things not being notated in the MLS regarding concessions and, of course, commission and buyers potentially paying more for the house, et cetera. So I'm wondering what conversations people have had around that.
I know looking at concessions might be more of a place to put things when things sell, and when you put that into sold in MLS, how to denote what went where and how could be an area. But I know with appraisals, that is going to be that debt to loan ratio number, and if it's depending on how it's written, it could affect that. Hoping with property values in Austin stabilizing, I think there's there's room for kind of some wiggle room in appraisals. It's not a giant amount of numbers being added, but I do know in some price points, those buyers are scraping up everything they have to be able to qualify. And so trying to understand how that commission gets distributed or compensation gets distributed is going to be an important thing to talk to your buyer's lender about. Making sure that how you write it is actually going to be how it can be loaned is going to be a valuable point too.
Max might be able to touch on this a little bit. Have you heard anything about loan to value stuff changing?
No. So Fannie Freddie, let me come back up here so everyone can see. VA has come out and said that a buyer can now pay commission. Fannie Freddie agencies, everybody has basically said it's the same as a title policy or a survey, right? What is industry standard and who's paying for it? So right now, if you put 10% down on a conventional loan, the seller can pay up to 6% in concessions, right? It's 6% plus title and survey if title and survey are checked to be paid by the seller. If they're checked to be paid by the buyer, then that 6% goes towards that. This is going to be the same with commission, right? So I'm over here thinking, since we spoke yesterday, there's this other spot for concessions, right? And I guess the theory behind that, maybe I'm wrong, is that instead of offering it as an agent commission, we're going to offer it as a concession.
It was actually, I mean, this had to do with the NAR settlement, that you can't list commission in the MLS anymore. And so it's, I mean, it's a bit of a workaround. And I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I won't be surprised if that goes away in 6 to 12 months also, because it's something that I think there's going to be lawsuits over it, and I think it goes away. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So my point is, if you put that in as a concession, and now you've got the commission on the buyer's side, but the seller's paying for it because it's concession, right? This is going to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we can get into the weeds on this pretty hard, like we talked about yesterday. And if you come up with, like, my memory is not great. So again, I try to come up with just simple rules. And so while we're getting, okay, raise your hand if the first contract you ever wrote when you were a brand new agent was a difficult thing that you were really, really worried about. Raise your hand if it was, right? Okay, what about contract number 5? How scary was contract number 5, right? So these addenda are new. And while they're new, first contract I ever wrote, somebody was looking over my shoulder literally on the entire, everything I entered, right? Don't need that on these addenda. But whenever you write your first deal with the new forms, maybe have your broker or a colleague look it over. You get it ratified, you're under contract now. Probably communicate with your lender really early in the process. Make sure that there's not a problem with how you're being paid. You're in the option period. If you screwed it up, everybody wants the deal to still be put together. You just fix it at that point in time. And I'm sorry, man, but it's the same thing. Like, I love things being explained, but like going back to, I'm a little bit lazy and a little bit dumb. Like, I'm just going to email Max and say, does this look okay?
Yeah.
And I trust him. So
my point is how the contract gets written will impact what the lender needs to do, right? And if you're counting the commission against the seller paying it against IPCs or not. But to your point and what we talked about yesterday and what I've been telling everybody, loan officers don't read all the words. That is a thing that we know. They need to. I'm training my guys to ask the questions. Who's paying a commission? How much is the buyer paying, right? We've seen a couple of deals come through lately where the buyer was paying a part of the commission. Agents need to be having that conversation with the lender as well. Hey, make sure you note that they're paying 1% of mine. However, or how are we going to collaborate to write this offer so that we can get all the commission paid for and all the other closing costs paid for, because maybe they're scraping the bottom or they've only got whatever it is. So there's my.
I would be communicating with my lender up front with loan estimates, give them the worst case scenario, include them having to pay my compensation on there.
I disagree with that, Drew. I mean, I don't think that that's proven itself out. You know, I think that we can find all kinds of problems. And I think it is a really, really low likelihood event that buyers are going to have this on their side of the settlement statement. There's two truths I'm looking at to make that decision. One is that the seller only cares about their net, or they should only care about their net. If you have a seller who's concerned about who's getting paid what, that's not a normal person. That's not a reasonable person, right? And buyers are really concerned about their monthly payment and what they're bringing, the cash they're bringing to close. So the buyer can have what they want, lower cash to close. The seller can have what they want, the net that they want, and we don't have to shift the commission over to it. And I think, I'm sorry to disagree, but I think that if you start preparing for an unlikely worst case event, then you're injecting problems into the scenario that might not, be worth worrying about. Now, granted, my personality is one where like I don't worry about things until they hit me in the back of the head. So
I'm typically the same way, right? I'm trying to change that about myself a little bit, but I think as long as they kind of have an idea up front, maybe you have it, two different, loan estimates. One with, hey, here's the seller paying all the buyer compensation. Here's another option just in case you have to cover it at closing. That way they at least know, because the last thing you want is your client to think they got to bring 10 grand to closing, and now all of a sudden they get caught by surprise. They got to bring 20, even though you've told them the whole time through the entire transaction. But every document they see come from the lender has 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. They didn't equate that extra 10,000 on top for your compensation. I just think you got to be really cautious with that, so you don't end up with an issue 3 days before closing saying the lender's been telling me I need 10,000, now it's 20,000, and you're like, I've been telling you got to pay me 10,000 the whole time, but they haven't seen it on paper. So I just think that you got to really communicate with your lender to make sure that there is absolutely no issues or any possibility of a miscommunication.
Well, I would say that every agent in this room is a really great negotiator and really good at writing up contracts and deals. And the idea of working the commission or compensation or title commitment or inspections and repairs, y'all are pros at that. And this is exactly where that's going to come in the most, because you're going to advocate for your buyer. You're going to make sure they get that wrapped into the transaction.
And I'll point out, we've talked about this, silver lining to the bad market. How much fun would this be to navigate in 2021, right?
I saw you.
Thanks. I'm Jennifer from Realty Austin Compass. Just without going into the weeds, but I actually appreciate how you both thought differently on that. Lenders. I've been talking about 4 lenders, my top 4 this week, including Misty. Some, their heads in the sand. And that's really, really concerning, because we can turn and talk to our lender. So I'm curious, from a lender point of view, is there education going on? Because I don't really see the world more than that.
So, not really,
Good answer.
I mean, there's not, right? Like this impacts you guys a lot more than it impacts us, right? From a lender perspective, we've already had guidance from the agencies, so we know how to navigate that. And now it's just reading a contract and figuring out what side of the set of the CD is the commission going on. Is it going on the buyer's side, or is it going on the seller's side?
It depends on how it's written. It depends on how the contract's written. And if you use, going back to simple rules, if you use the commission addenda, one of them, either the TXR or the ABLE or unlock, it's going to go on the right side if you write it correctly. That's just the fact. And going back to like your first few deals, you might screw it up. Well, get your work checked, before you submit an offer, or right after you get the offer under contract and you're under option period. If you find out 3 days before closing that your buyer has to pay $10,000 they didn't know about, you failed. And quite honestly, you probably don't deserve that commission. Think ahead a little bit.
But there is not a lot, to answer your question. There is not a lot of training going on in the industry that I've seen. And I can only speak to my company, but we talk about this often. They say me do all of these different presentations with Eric here. I've got a couple of different other podcasts that I've done. So like for my company, I'm putting this information out there and what needs to happen. I can't speak to what other companies are doing, but there's not like this industry standard of this is what we're going to do. It's kind of follow the agency.
Use loan people is what I'm hearing.
Please. Last one in the back, and then we'll move on.
So I have to introduce myself as sort of the melancholic temperament. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But I feel like there was a large monetary settlement involved with this. And we also have the Department of Justice still thinking through all this. And so I understand as real estate professionals our perspective. But I'm wondering if there's any concern that we're not sort of meeting the merits of the argument if we just end up sort of getting to the same endpoint, but our contracts look a little different. We're going through different hoops to get to the same end game. If we feel like we're not just kicking the can down the road and we're going to have to face further issues down the road because we're not really addressing the core issue that, again, the plaintiffs in this case and the Department of Justice is concerned about in our industry.
I think there are a lot of different addenda, whether it's ABOR releasing their forms, TAR, Trex still working on theirs. The overall argument of this antitrust issue that happened with NAR. I think the biggest thing is our industry needs more transparency, and transparency usually means more paperwork. But at the same time, the idea that the commission's being removed from MLS or compensation, we need a compensation form that's going to disclose what everybody's getting paid, that everybody signs off on every transaction. And I think that's the biggest shift that you're seeing, is that extra sheet of paper providing that transparency, so no one can say, wait, I didn't have a represented buyer and you ended up taking, X percent on this listing, double. I didn't understand that didn't happen, or just all these different circumstances where in different states, maybe it wasn't talked about as much as it was in Texas. But the idea that transparency is needed, that's what this one compensation form can do to make sure, hey, as a company at Moreland, you knew what we were getting paid, you knew what the other person was getting paid. We're all in agreement that this is a good thing, and nothing was, baked in or not explained properly, or I work for free, or all those things that got this industry in trouble. And it's always, the few bad apples that end up changing things. Well, here we are. So to that effect, I think that one compensation form kind of, to me, understands everybody's doing what they're supposed to. Thanks so much. And then we keep doing our jobs.
No, I agree completely. And what I think is likely to happen with the DOJ, if they take it a step further, is they completely do away with cooperative compensation. And I strongly believe that changes absolutely nothing, right?
And I think we'll wait for the market and the sellers and the buyers to, follow suit. But, that's a perspective.
I think, obviously the DOJ is looking at it as a national level. Luckily for us in Texas, we've kind of been doing it right the whole time. So it's not a seismic shift. It's pretty simple for the most part. Other states, we don't know, but I've heard horror stories of they got to completely restructure the entire way they do business. Whereas here in Texas, we're fortunate enough, it's this big of a change. No problem.
The guy who brought the lawsuit, I forget his name. He's out of Minnesota. He's a discount broker. He's an attorney. He was a discount broker, and then he ran a title company after that. And he just hates agents. And no, I'm being serious. But he has a lot of. When I listened to a podcast with him, I honestly nodded my head in agreement for the first 10 minutes until he got to the point about what he thought was best for the consumer. What he's going after next is he's going after dual agency intermediary. Right. That'd be big for the big brokerages. That honestly, we're big enough now that would impact us, and we have to figure out how to navigate that. I would love it if he did away with 1099 personally, but that's what he thinks is the root of all evil in the real estate industry. I don't see that going away, but it could. At the end of the day, if either one of those things happened, who would need to worry about that? The brokers would. The agents wouldn't need to worry about it. Y'all are still going to sell houses, unless a big portion of your business is double ending transactions. You don't really have anything to worry about.
Good stuff. That's kind of leads into the next question for you guys. How should listing agents field offers from buyer's agents and communicate buyer agent compensation to buyer's agents?
So I'm supposed to get first on this one. Lots and lots of communication. I think that after a few months, everybody's going to realize that most listing agents are really, really happy to get an offer, but there's understandable anxiety over, is the seller going to pay it? We borrowed this idea from Drew. We're kicking around the idea of having an automatic text message that you can send that says, yes, bring us the offer. Yes, we do expect for you to get paid. That's what we're doing about it. Everybody at our firm is setting the expectation with the sellers that it's a good thing to have a buyer agent on the other end of the deal, and that all the sellers should care about is what their net is. Somebody comes in with a really high commission, I'm going to look at that and go, that's weird, but how does the offer look, right? If somebody comes in with a low commission, I'm going to go, oh, probably a low service broker that's been around forever. Completely fine. Here's what we should expect. So it's all about communication as a listing agent. The concessions field is in the MLS right now. If you've set the expectation that they're going to pay a market standard commission, you should probably enter that amount in the concessions field to make it easy on everybody else. But if or when that field goes away, I don't think it's problematic.
So, you stole my thunder. We're setting up.
Sorry, man. Hey, it was your idea to swap on that other one. So.
Fair. So we're going to roll out a text system, text Pure 1 to 8800 or whatever. You'll get an auto response back that says, hey, this listing is offering X% in cooperating compensation. This is not a contract for payment. Voila, you're done, right? And it helps both sides. The worst thing is when you're a buyer's agent and you're calling the listing agent, and what happens? Nobody answers. They don't call you back. They don't text you back. They're on vacation at the beach, whatever that may be, right? And here you are, your buyers want an answer, right? So it serves a purpose of giving the buying side the information that they want and deserve in a timely manner. And then as a listing agent, Do you want your phone ringing all the time asking what you're offering? Probably not, right? Do you want 1,000 text messages if when we get back into that type of market, hey, what are you paying? What are you paying? What are you paying? No. So it's an easy, simple solution to communicate that and really just set it up to where it helps all parties involved. And I think that's going to be our route until we get our hands slapped for it if it becomes an issue.
I don't know that you get your hand slapped. I think it might become unnecessary over time.
Maybe, yeah. But I just think it's an easy way and convenient for now, and we're going to monitor it and see how it goes. But
So-
we've figured it out and have it ready to deploy.
Okay, I was just going to say, I know for us, a lot of that organically is going to get transferred when you're setting up that showing. Hey, I'll be there at 3:00. Oh yeah, what is the seller? Is the seller offering concessions, compensation, things like that? We will have some attorney language on our site on the exact property detail pages or on the exact property site of just like you'd look at a virtual tour or a survey or any other addenda that compensation language will be there if you're looking for it specifically for that property. So that's how we're handling it.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that you guys are communicating your agents are setting the right expectations with the sellers.
Questions seem to be in the back.
Let's stay back here.
Thank you. I'm Brennan with Cooper Sotheby's. In regards to setting up appointments for showings, we kind of brainstormed with a group of my friends about getting the compensation agreement between brokers before you go and show the property, just so you're so just the text it would be sufficient for some people. But do you think that buyer's agents should be requiring having that actually in their hands? Because
as you set up the showing, we're recommending that if just like in ALN or any other kind of clubhouse type environment where it is not regulated, that's how this is going to become. So getting that cooperation between brokers is probably the easiest way to send that over and say, hey, I'd love to show your house. Here's the form, and we'll see how that goes.
I'll counterpoint that, and it's just me being like efficient or lazy, one of the two. But I think that you can have the conversation like whenever your client expresses interest in the property. Now, that said, Cooper Sotheby's, Moreland Properties, you guys probably have an extra zero on the commission that you're dealing with. So if I'm out showing a really expensive property and I'm going to go spend 6 hours showing 6 properties, that's not a huge lift to get 6 agreements signed before you go make this big effort to show. On the flip side, if I'm showing, 12 properties to a relo who's coming into town to spend $400,000 on a house, probably not. It's a risk tolerance decision. And if I were showing a property that was going to put 6 figures in my pocket, I probably would get it signed.
Yeah, I'm with Eric on that. I think you're going to have a whole ton of legwork just to be able to show properties that get an agreement signed by every single listing agent. And we don't even know what that compensation flow looks like, because if it's directly from the seller, now you got to get a broker to owner agreement, right? So now that listing agent has to get with the seller has to sign it. Most listing agents probably aren't going to go through the work to do that. And at that point, they're probably going to be like, we're going to determine that based off what your offer is. And so I think it's an unrealistic expectation, and we'll say a couple zeros off of the commission number. But at the end of the day, your compensation is always solidified through your buyer rep agreement. So it doesn't really matter if the sellers are paying in retrospect, because your buyer has already agreed to it. And it's your job as an agent to figure out how to get that structured into the deal to where your buyer and the seller also feel comfortable with it. And it's a win-win for everybody. Like, that's the main goal.
Yeah, I think it's not a one size fits all, right?
It's like early legwork to go, hey, what's most important when you're even writing the offer? What's most important to the seller? What do they need? But I do agree, most buyers want to understand if they're going to have to bring something to the table or not before you even walk through the door. Finding that information out early is key.
I think those phone calls, sorry, I'll stop after this. What you're discovering is the seller reasonable by making those phone calls, right? I want to show the property. Is the seller open to paying a buyer agent commission? I think that we could all agree that a seller that says no is not a reasonable seller. But it's also not black and white. You're also not discovering, like, is this person reasonable or not? It's like, how motivated are they? Like you said, Sarah, like, when would they like to close? Do they need a lease back? Things like that. These are all the questions that we've asked for a long time.
And if it's broker to broker, obviously it's going to be way easier because just the agent has to sign it. But if it's direct from the seller, so if decoupling happens, it's going to be a hard uphill battle to get a seller to actually sign that document before showing a property, I feel.
My name is Salma, and I'm with 12 Rivers Realty, and I have the microphone, sir. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to address the elephant in the room, which is we've already folded it into the price. Like, we should be having that conversation with the seller, with the buyer, with each other. Like, when we did comps, the 6% was already, it's been previously, right? So we should kind of start with that as we're discussing with our clients too, because that way we all know, and then they all know, and then we're going to get each other's stuff signed so that we all get paid. I feel like there's anxiety, at least for me, if like the listing agent responds or doesn't respond to me, like, do I send the offer? Do I not send the offer? You know what I mean? It's like getting in the way of what's important, really. But the 6% is already in it. Is it not?
I mean, that's a market knowledge question where you look at the neighborhood of where the listing is, what's sold recently, you've done your work. But talking to a seller, I would imagine if you say, okay, well, there was some commissions that were, in there. Would you like to, we need to have this pricing, or just expect if we're not going to pay that agent, it'd be this pricing. Most sellers are going, well, I'm going to get this price. I'm getting this price. So I think it is a lot of education on our end, like you're talking about, where it just makes sense to you and it's a no-brainer. If you explain it to your client in a certain way, it will be a no-brainer to them, but they don't have all that knowledge. And I think that's where we come in to be the advocate and the advisors.
We got a question back here.
Thanks, Max. Wes Womack Real Estate. Hey, not to sound naive, but it's going back to the compensation between brokers. Is that not a redundant form, considering, like what Drew said, we already have commissions established in a buyer rep agreement, and all offers are going to have the addendum for commission. In that addendum, it says that addendum controls. So who cares about the compensation? Am I stupid?
Yeah, no, you're not stupid, Wes. It's a contract question more than anything, and it's one that I learned yesterday and had to redo our instructionals. If you use the TXR form, it also requires the broker to broker agreement as well. I think it's silly. That's why we prefer the ABOR form. But it's all minutia. Like, however you want to contract it that way. Pick a way. Make that your preferred method and just do it the same way every time.
Yeah. And as a broker, you can have your best practices on, hey, we think you need this. Hey, we don't think you need this. But I know for Moreland, we want to make sure that everybody understands how everybody's getting paid based on the NAR effect. And we need to be more compliant and transparent.
I'm Vicki Davis. Oh, that's very loud. I'm with Bramlett Residential. And Eric, you had mentioned the seller concession field. And I'm just curious, is that something buyers can see when they look at the properties?
Yeah, I believe so.
So then my follow-up question is, do you think there's going to be confusion with that, and they're going to be like, oh, I can use this for whatever and not think about it?
I think it'll be noticed about as much as the title policy field, which has been in the MLS for a decade.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, if it happens, Vicki, like, it's a good question, because you do get like the engineer types that tend to scrutinize everything, and you'll have that conversation once and you'll say, oh no, this is for the buyer agent commission. Remember, we talked about that when we signed the buyer rep agreement. But those buyers
but
are
technically, if you put something in compensation, it has to be for anything they want. That buyer could apply it to compensation, or they could apply it to new wood floors. So I'm not advising that be a field that we utilize unless it's after closing and we can really outline that out for more of a back end, like, oh, what happened here type thing.
She's talking about the advertised field, I think. Yeah, I think as a workaround. Yeah, it kind of is, and that's sort of what's happened nationally. And I can't remember who said that she was melancholy about the whole situation, but are there going to be more steps? Yeah, I think the next step is probably that field goes away. I don't think it becomes a problem. How often does a buyer pay, not in 2020, 2021, 2020, early 2022, but how often does a buyer pay the title policy? Right. And why is that? It's because the buyers are sensitive to their cash to close. And I think the same dynamic, you just multiply it times 3-ish, is going to apply to the buyer agent compensation field. The thing that people look at when they look at the listings are the price and the pictures, and they decide what they're gonna look at based on that. And you have developed strong rapport with them. You've explained the process to them. And so it's not the first time they've heard, that's how I get paid, right? Now, sure, it can be shocking. When I was a brand new agent, I was deathly afraid that somebody would notice how much I was getting paid at closing because I didn't believe in my value. I didn't have a lot of value then, right? So that's why we've all talked about this from the get, is the number one thing is to understand your value, make sure you can communicate it. So if they start speaking in dollar amounts rather than percentages, you can say, yeah, that's what I earn. And they go, wow, that's a lot of money. And you go, yeah, I'm really good at my job. Seriously.
And as far as the seller netting the most for the property, that can look a lot of different ways. And compensation for us can, to prove your value of, knowing which house to purchase, or any other and little things in a transaction that, these huge repairs that when people go in unrepresented, they end up having a giant amount of expenses on the other side, or a seller not knowing what offer is good enough and how to negotiate a better price. All that stuff ends up netting them more money, more of their value there. So it's just a matter of kind of, yes, we're full of value and there's a compensation for that, but the benefits outweigh anything that I can see, which I think is great.
I would be cautious on the concessions field, though, because it's not a guarantee. It's still a negotiable item in the contract. So they can put it in there and be like, oh, never mind, your offer wasn't high enough. And so now your buyers have a false expectation. And as a listing agent, I don't think I would be trying to use it as a workaround realistically, but that's my opinion.
I'll get one more in the back.
Firstly, I'm Carmen Joya, and any of my listings that end in 3s, you could just expect that reasonable seller.
So I think, by the way, I read all the memes. That's how I get most of my news. And I do think that's funny. I personally, Emily's here. Here's my pitch on what that field, the concession field, should gravitate to. It should be just like the title policy field that says, is everybody aware that there's actually a title policy field when you enter listing? Right. And the choices are yes, no, negotiable, right? If you have negotiable or yes, that means, hey, the seller, we've set the right expectations. If you have no in that field, then you know, hey, the seller wants to cut out 89% of the market who uses buyer rep agreements. I think the concession field doesn't matter. And we just signed a lease on an office and just down the road, right? And I used an agent because I'm not an expert at commercial leasing. Chad lives in the neighborhood. He's done this for 20 plus years. And I asked him, I said, how does it work for you guys? Because you guys don't have cooperative compensation in your database, right? He said, no. I said, well, do you call ahead and make sure that they're going to pay or what? And he said, no, man. I said, I know 90% of these guys. And he said, they want me to bring them tenants and they're not going to screw me because they want me to bring them tenants. And he said, now the 10% that I don't know, certainly I'm going to give them a call. And I think that's probably where it moves to. I think it probably moves to a situation where you're not even looking at the concession field. You're looking at other potential orange or red flags, like limited service brokerages where you know that you're effectively negotiating directly with the seller. That's an orange flag. They don't have any guidance, right? So maybe you put forth a little bit of extra effort at that point in time. But I think that the concession field, I'm happy that it's there right now because I think it's good training wheels towards where we're ultimately going.
Seems to me we should just add a box to the listing that says, is the seller reasonable?
I would love that. Let's do that for sure. Yeah.
I think that's how we solve this problem.
I love that.
One more point as far as sellers when you're sitting in a listing appointment. And since this shift of getting representation agreements is happening at the beginning, you might bring that long form from Texas Realtors about what someone is signing before they view your house and go, this is what any represented buyer is going to have already signed. And so the idea that they're walking in your home, how do you make that incentive there for them, or making sure y'all can work together to a close might help as well.
Yeah. So how should buyer agents present offers to listing agents?
So I believe typically you're going to submit an offer, usually called listing agent, right? More times than not. You want a lease back? Do they need, closing time, whatever that may be? And then, of course, within that conversation, it's, hey, what are you guys offering for compensation? That's probably how things are going to go. What my advice would be is after I submit the offer, I would call that agent and be like, hey, I sent you an offer outlining some of the key points. And then I would be prefacing, just so you know, or, oh, by the way, hey, my commission is a non-negotiable part of this contract, right? And just set that expectation up front. And that way they're taking it off the table. And I think if we all work collectively together as an industry, without colluding, right? We're here to help each other because someday you're going to be on the buying side. I promise you. And the last thing you want is that listing agent trying to negotiate your compensation out of the deal. So on the flip side,
I'll just say for the FBI agents, the commission was negotiated previously with the buyer. I mean, it was. That's when it was negotiable. That's whenever you negotiated it.
Yeah.
And if your stance is, I've done a ton of work and I got you to contract, and I'm not negotiating my commission now, that's a completely reasonable stance to have.
Yeah, I think, it'd almost be like, if we start messing with each other's commissions, let's just say, it's like putting in an offer and writing in special provisions. Oh, hey, listing agent to take $10,000 in listing commission in lieu of X price, right? We're not going to do that. And so I don't think we should be doing it to the buy side. So I'm just going to preface, hey, just so you know, my compensation is non-negotiable in this deal. Do whatever you got to do on the list price and concessions. That's fine. But I'm putting that stance up front to hopefully, bring some sort of, communication levelness to the field so you don't have that person just automatically going straight for that. That's in place. And I'm asking for you to cover it in said various ways, depending on how your contract's structured. Don't automatically go for that when you start negotiating.
Hold on real quick. Let me get you the mic so everyone else can hear.
If we're back to a slightly more competitive, or it's a house that just, there are multiple offers, if they end up on 2.5, that's fine. My buyer owes me that 0.5% still, right? We're not.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make
and that's
sure
a
that was
business
clear.
decision for you to make, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, if they come back to you and say, hey, we're only willing to pay 2.5 and you got a buyer rep for 3.
Yeah.
I mean, you're either going to say, hey, buyer, you owe me 0.5%, or you're going to say, fine, I'm going to take the 2.5. That's totally up to you. And that's a business decision.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, set the expectation. We've been talking about setting expectations all day. It's kind of been the theme.
Yeah.
Set the expectation with the listing agent. Like, hey, don't mess with my commission. Do whatever you got to do over here. Adjust the price. Your net is to your seller. It is what it is. But just don't go over here and mess with this field.
Sarah,
Eric's twitching. So like, go ahead.
So I was going to say, well, Sarah, you talked about it yesterday where sometimes it makes sense, right? Do you mind talking about that?
I mean, at the end of a deal, to get something done, negotiating off different things, repairs, concessions, commissions, things like that, you end up doing what's best and making sure the deal closes. And I know that looks different in every single transaction. Just to piggyback on Drew, I know with the question about how to present buyer's agents presenting offers, hopefully you've had all that information before you showed. Some people are saying, okay, well, it's listed here, listed there. You'll have all that information. I mean, to me, when you present an offer, you write an email, you call the agent and you say, I am excited to bring this to you. I look forward to working with you. I think you have your best practices and polish them up. And, negotiating for your buyer is your highest and best use. So you're going to do that. But hopefully that's already worked out to me on the beginning end. So that isn't something that you're trying to say, hey, by the way, this is my agreement. It's like hopefully that's already done. And you're on your way with trying to get the best thing for your buyer and put the seller together and come to a great close.
I think there's a couple of scenarios where you could be asked to reduce your commission, and one you're probably fine with and the other one you're probably not. If you've been working with a buyer for 6 months and it's a really expensive house and the buyer and the seller are in an impasse, seller won't come down anymore, buyer won't come up anymore. And if you kick in a 0.5 point or a point to get the deal done, how many people have done that or would do that? That doesn't change, right?
You're still doing it.
Right. To the listing I told you about, most expensive house I'd ever sold in my life at the time. That's what happened. And I kicked in a point and I still got a 6-figure commission. And I was so happy. Couldn't have been happier. And my buyer was happy and the seller was happy. I'm still friends with both of them. There's another way that you try to go after somebody's commission. And that's where you present one offer. And it's a good offer. And then the first thing they do is kick back and say, well, we're not going to come, we're going to give you the price, but you have to come up, or you have to come down on a commission. You have to come down on 1%. I could strongly argue that that's a terrible negotiating strategy. Terrible. You've effectively made the buyer agent mad at that point in time. The seller has a much lower likelihood of coming to terms than if they had simply come down in price a little bit. And the net result's the same to the seller if they would have just reduced the price a little bit versus go after your commission. And because it's a bad strategy, that's why I don't think you're going to see it a whole lot. You might see it a little bit more in the first few months when this happens, but bad strategies and bad tactics don't stick around because they're not successful. And that's why I think that you're not going to see it a whole lot. That's why I think that whenever you know your value and you say, look, when I present an offer as a buyer's agent, I'm going to say, hey, I'm bringing you an offer. And the seller or listing agent are going to go, That's awesome. Like, the market sucks, and I'm really glad to see your offer. The next thing I'm going to say is, great. So when do they want to move out of the house? They need a lease back. Is there anything really important to them? And you gather all those facts. And then I say, my buyer's rep agreement says 3%. So that's what you're going to see in there. Not even asking, what are you offering? This is what my buyer's rep agreement says. Buyer needs you guys to pay it because they're sensitive to cash to close. And now you're negotiating. And as Sarah and Drew pointed out earlier, that's what we do, right? We follow processes. We know contracts to some extent. But by and large, we're all in this business because we're good at solving problems. We're good at working through things to make sure that our client gets.
We got a couple of questions over here.
Okay, so somebody asked in the chat, do you all anticipate a lot more buyers going directly to the listing agents? And if so, how are you all advising your listing agents to handle that?
I'm going to say no to that, and then depending on what forms you use, and we're not doing a contract class, but know your listing agreement and protect yourself in there for unrepresented buyers.
I mean, I know in any market, there's some unrepresented buyers looking at properties. And I know talking to our sellers, you have that conversation at the time you sign the listing. You know, if someone is unrepresented, how would you like to handle that? Whether they're an attorney or a banker or someone that knows everything, or they've, sold 7 or 8 houses in a row and they may not use an agent. That may happen, but that, I think, to me, it's more of a listing, how you service your listings altogether, your practices. Okay, if someone's unrepresented, is Mr. Miss Seller, do you want proof of funds before they step in the house? Do you want a driver's license, a copy of that on file? How are we vetting this? Because if without an agent, they haven't been vetted, and who knows if they are really seeing your house because they want to buy it or not, or doing other things. So I think that just becomes a question you really have a conversation with your seller at, no matter what market we're in or any of these forms as well. Will you meet them at the house and let them in?
Well, as the listing agent you don't have to have a buyer rep agreement to show your own listing. But to piggyback off of what Sarah said, talk with your seller about it ahead of time. I think it's very reasonable to say, we will only show properties to unrepresented buyers if they have a pre-approval letter.
And treat everybody the same across the board.
Plug for Emily and Abor, like, download Forewarn if you don't already have it. That's the scary part, is there are psychos out there, and
you can look up your friends and family too.
What's that?
Look up your friends and family.
Oh, I've already done it.
Don't look mine up.
But I don't think there's going to be an uptick in the number of unrepresented buyers, because again, it's not a very successful strategy for buying a house. It's way more pleasant to use a buyer agent than it is to not use a buyer agent. The same percentage of people who are cheapskates and want to try to save a little bit of money and have a bad experience, that's not going to change.
But be prepared.
Another question. What do you all recommend for a process for leasing?
Yeah, so the process I recommend for leasing is to find a really good property manager and just refer everything to them. I know that's probably not the answer that people want, but if your core competency is not leasing, then just stop doing it.
Or find someone in your office that's really good at it.
Agreed, yeah.
Just to preface, all these rules apply for leasing, in case anybody didn't realize that part. So buyer reps got to get signed ahead of time. Compensation is not offered in the MLS. Your tenant may have to pay you as their representation, which I think is going to be really hard to get accomplished in a lot of variable ways. So leases are tough.
Drew was saying yesterday how much he loves leases, and he would like to have them all.
So I will say this about leasing, though, like a valuable lesson from it. I started my career as an apartment locator on East Riverside, 2003. That was super fun. So in that industry, there's no cooperative compensation agreements anywhere, and there's not even a standard, commission amount, and it works. And it works through some phone calls, and it works mainly because those apartments want you to bring them tenants, and they want to transact. And the same concepts are on our side here. We don't need cooperative compensation in order for us to do business.
Thank you guys for all of that. This is really great. We still have, about 10, 15 minutes. If there's any other questions, I'll start walking around the room.
Skip Haval.
Hi, Eric. You mentioned download Forewarned. Is that what you called it?
It's called Forewarn, yeah.
And where?
Go to your member benefits at abor.com. You can just email Emily and she'll give you the direct link.
And
that's what I usually do. Last time I emailed her, I said, where do I find this? And she said, it's on the homepage.
Thank you.
You click here.
Google that.
Yeah,
So thanks you guys. I mean, super informative, and it's great to be here and collaborate with all these different agents, which Trey and I were talking about. It'd be great if we could see more of that. It's wonderful as an industry. Just two things. I think one, nothing's really changing. I mean, in practice, we're still doing the same things. We still communicate with each other. We still do all. Now you just have to put it on paper. It's transparency, right? And that's good. And secondly, I think, we talk about, unrepresented buyers and all of those. We provide a service. You go to a dentist, you're going to pay a dentist. You're going to go to a doctor, you're going to pay a doctor. We're professionals, right? Our expectation is to get paid. It's nothing, so it's just having that conversation and understanding how to explain it. You get paid what you're worth. And I think if we all remember that, it'll make it easier.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, and each of us is giving everybody the information on brokerage services and explaining representation and how you advocate for people. They want to know what you're going to do for them. They want to be able to trust you. They want to know. So,
real estate's this weird industry that's just like the legal profession where everybody hates attorneys and loves their attorney. And that's the same dynamic we got where everybody thinks that we are overpaid except for their agent because we do a great job for our clients.
Anybody else? Where? There.
Confusion regarding reading the NAR settlement agreement and the things that were agreed to, the changes that we're all here discussing. And it reads specifically that you have to have a buyer agreement signed before touring a house. It does not say a buyer agent representation agreement. And from my understanding, they specifically wrote it that way. Now, ABOR has the word representation in it. Obviously, I like buyer representation agreements, and the buyer should like it too, because being a customer is pretty worthless. But that's still a question, and it seems to be a misunderstanding, at least in Austin. And so I'm curious about the discrepancy there.
I think, to my understanding of it, you have to define the level of service you're providing, and you have to define your compensation.
Hold on, we got an answer back here.
We got.
Yeah, hi, Emily with ABOR. There's no discrepancy. The rules that the MLS has adopted match the NAR settlement in that they require a written agreement. We've provided 3 form options that are optional. They're all buyer's reps or touring agreements, but you don't have to use those. You could suffice with a letter of intent to purchase or some alternative written agreement form. The only requirement is that it be written, be signed by all parties, requires disclosures that are required under the settlement, that compensation is negotiable and not set by law, and include an ascertainable amount of compensation. That's specific from the lawsuit. So it can't be open-ended. The ascertainable amount could be 0 if you so choose, but it's got to be defined. And those are the Unlock MLS rules are pretty clearly aligned directly with the settlement. The forms we prepared are buyer's reps because that's what people are used to, but they're not mandatory. A written agreement.
If I can jump in, I don't think you're going to have a problem no matter what it says. I think that if you have a limited, like if you're talking about the limited service agreement or whatever it's called in order to show 1 property or 3 properties for 1 day, you explain to them that, look, this is a 24-hour agreement. If you end up making an offer on any of these properties within 24 hours, you have to use me. Otherwise, you want to get into the house, I have to have you sign this. And they're going to be okay with it. Well, I'll defer to Emily and to the attorneys that she worked with. I mean, guys, we're super lucky that ABOR spent so much time researching this for us. And I very much trust that they've looked into it. And if I use one of their forms or if I use the TXR form, it's all going to work out.
Well, it's going to be a learning experience for everybody, and we're going to get through it together, and it's going to be a lot of communication. The theme here is transparency, right? And what everybody's got to do. So some of those concerns, I think, will just work themselves out through communication with agents and their brokers and Emily. So that, yeah. Really appreciate you guys doing this. Thank you guys for attending. Do y'all have anything you want to end with? No?
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.